So welcome to the masterclass on how to coach a micromanager to release the toxic behavior. And I want to start today with just a little story about my transition, what occurred for me in this, and where this topic actually comes from. So for 25 years, I have worked as an engineer in the oil and gas industry. And one of the things that I noticed in myself is that at times this stress would come up in me and I would turn into one of those negative micromanagers, which is why I'm probably one of the best experts to talk on this, because I know what it's like from the micromanager side, from the person with this. But it wasn't until my last year of working as an engineer in the oil and gas industry, and I've always had this passion for my employees. I've always had this desire for my team and my employees to do well, to exceed really highly. And so in my last year, we had just gone through COVID. And I was sitting in the boardroom with our leadership team, and we had the owner of the engineering company that I work for, we had our HR, we had the head of engineering, and myself, the head of projects. And we were talking about this concept of bringing all the employees back into the office. And so everybody had come in and gone back to, had been working at home because of COVID. And one of the things that I noticed in this session is that different members of our team had different philosophies around whether we should bring them in or leave them at home. And so a couple of the people in this meeting felt it was really important to bring the staff back into the workplace. They felt it was a really strong need that those people come back so that we can see them, so that we can visually supervise them. And one of the things that I noticed for me was this anxiety started to show up in me. And what was happening in this moment was I was actually trying to argue on behalf of the employees. And I was doing it because over the time of COVID, one of the things that I did as a manager is I would reach out to everybody on a daily basis to check in with them, to make sure they had enough work. I could see that they were performing as well, if not better, than the work in our office. And so it was frustrating me that the rest of our leadership team didn't see this. They didn't recognize how hard our team was working from being at home. And one of the reasons was because I had this habit of connecting with people on a regular basis, and our organization didn't. But what was happening for me and what was leading to this frustration, this irritation that was showing up in me, was that people were not recognizing the amount of effort I was putting in as a leader. And one of the things I'm going to go into when I dive into this area of micromanaging is what is the psychological need of a micromanager. And so for me, I was like, oh, I need to step back. I need to pay attention to what is going on internally in me. And it was actually the day I decided to resign from engineering and go, I need to figure out why I have these emotional stresses that are going on within me, and determine a path forward so that I can ensure that I would not turn back into that negative micromanager, that person who had this toxic belief that everything needed to be perfect and that my team and myself need to show up and follow these sets of rules that were in my head, that I could be more flexible in my work. And so I actually, a few days later, handed in my resignation and started to plan my path forward, because I believe in the empowerment of our team, even though the behavior of micromanaging is naturally within me. And it's one of the things that I did not know before, is where this natural behavior or habit comes up around micromanaging. And so often what I have seen out in the communication, in all of the training that I've taken, right, is that if you just tell me to stop micromanaging, then it'll be easy. I'll stop doing it. And the reality is, telling someone to stop micromanaging is like telling a smoker to stop smoking. The smoker knows, right, that it's bad for them, that it's not appropriate, but still there's something going on, right? And the same is true of micromanagement. And so after I resigned from engineering and started to be like, okay, I want to go into the leadership coaching area, I stumbled across a process known as the process communication model. And for once the light bulb went off, I felt like, oh, there is reason, there is logic, and I now know what to do. And it was in the discovery of the process communication model that has been around since the 1970s that I was able to understand the psychological reason as to why I would transition into a micromanagement behavior. And that now I can be one of the experts to teach people on how to overcome micromanagement and one of the other 6 negative behaviors that we happen to have. So over this next about 30 minutes is what I'm going to stick it to, 30, 35. I'm going to take you through the 3 strategies that you need to know, that you need to understand around micromanagement. So we're going to start with, why do people micromanage? What is actually going on from a psychological need standpoint inside the person who is micromanaging and showing up with those behaviors? The second thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about what are the language patterns. How should you communicate to somebody who experiences and goes through this micromanagement so that you can help move them from the state of distress into a positive state, help them remove what we call the attacker mask and pull that off so that you can find the positive, motivated, excited person underneath them. And then finally, we're going to dive into some strategies that you can do to help the person who has a tendency to move into micromanagement to build plans in their day to move forward. Now, here's the one thing that I'm going to promise you as part of this class is there will be no sales pitch at the end of this class. There's absolutely no sales pitch. So I encourage you to participate full out, to really enjoy this process, to ask good questions, and as we move through this process. So the other thing you'll know, I am not a slide deck person. I've been trained in slide decks, and as a communication coach, I know how to use them, but I prefer communication to be able to be something where you can visually see, ideally if possible, as well as hear the tone, the body language, because 90% of our communication is not around the words we say, but around the tone, the gestures, the body language that someone brings into the situation. So let's dive into the first bit, which is, why do people micromanage? Like, where does this come from? And what is the underlying root behavior that is causing people to step into this process? So I'm going to dive into the research that Dr. Kahler, who is the creator of the process communication model, discovered and what he was doing. So back in the 1970s, he was doing work in an area of psychology known as transactional analysis. And transactional analysis is literally the communication between people. How do we transact in our words and behaviors to people? And he was in this group of psychologists who were really studying things like the ego, the games theory, which you may have heard of, that is really about the persecutor, the rescuer, and the victim, and how those negative communication triangles go on. And as he was doing this research, he developed this concept called mini scripts. And mini scripts came out of him sitting and observing people in their language patterns while they were going through what he called a distress sequence, or this mini script. And so he discovered that there were, related to the ego, that there were these 6 different mini scripts. So these mini scripts surrounded the concepts of being perfect, around the concept of being strong, the concept of pleasing others. So we've often heard that one clearly, and around the concept of trying hard and hurry up. And so be perfect actually has 2 sides to it. And so when he discovered this, he also discovered that in us are these repeating language patterns that become our self-sabotaging technique. And so the pattern, or the script, that is related to micromanagement is actually the be perfect script. And in that be perfect mini script, there is this concept that is going around and around in the head of those of us who struggle with this dimension of micromanaging, of that until it is perfect, I can't have fun, I can't move forward. And so this was the thesis that he started to recognize. And so what he also recognized is that every person has one of these different scripts in them. And it turns out that the micromanager script is this be perfect script that they are trying to do. And it's that they are trying to show up as perfect for the other person. As he worked through this process, he actually got hired by NASA to help with the interviewing process of the astronauts back in the late 1970s. And NASA was so fascinated, and the psychiatrist from NASA at the time, Dr. Terry McGuire, was so fascinated by Taby's ability to listen to people's speaking patterns to figure out what distress sequence they would go to in space. And so imagine going up into space, even nowadays, right, and being placed in the space station, and you guys getting into an argument, somebody going into the micromanaging behavior. If they didn't have a tool or a process to help move that person out and to build plans so that that person could transition back in, right? It's not like at the end of the day, all of the people that micromanaging person was working with could go home. No, they have to deal with it. And so NASA realized that these different scripts were important to do. So they continued to sponsor the research around what is these different patterns. And so if we stick on the one pattern that we're focusing on today, which is micromanaging, essentially where this research went to is they realized that there were language patterns within the micromanager that aligned with what was going on. And so the person micromanaging is actually trying to resolve a frustrated anger in them that is around what they believe others to not be thinking logically. And so when this happens, they get this frustrated anger, and what they're actually trying to resolve, which is really surprising and interesting to me, is this resolution of sadness and loss about something that's happening. So earlier, I told you the story, right, of how I was sitting in this meeting, And we were all talking about bringing the staff back in. And one of the things that was coming up for me that I wasn't recognizing that I needed to deal with is I was really sad over the loss, and this may seem a little odd, but the loss that my staff were not being seen as doing good enough, that my team was not being seen as performing well enough, and that they were losing this freedom to be able to work from their home. And logically, in my head, it made no sense that they needed to come back into the workplace. Now, if they wanted to come back in and work in the office, I was happy with that. I enjoy having people in the space, but I didn't want them to lose the freedom of being able to work from this hybrid place. I didn't want them to lose the recognition that they were doing amazing work, because I took the time to and put the effort into seeing it, and nobody else was doing that on our team. And so this feeling of loss and frustration comes up in somebody who is micromanaging. And so when you think of micromanaging, the people who are micromanaging are actually going through what we call a distress sequence. And so the first thing that you will notice in somebody who may be moving into the distress of micromanaging is normally they talk and they speak around time, schedule, and logic. They're very concerned about making sure that time and schedule is on board. The second thing that starts to happen, and see if you can notice this in people that you know have this quality, but they have a tend to over communicate. And so they will over explain and create complexity in the words that they do. And this is the first sign that they're actually starting to experience distress. And so what do I mean by over explaining? So if I take this topic of micromanagement, I could start by going, understanding micromanagement is important. And it is important because when you understand micromanagement, you can. So you can hear how in that sentence structure, right? I said essentially the importance of micromanagement 3 times, right? I didn't need to, and it's actually better if I don't. But what happens is somebody who is starting to experience that stress has this desire to be perfect and make sure that they have clearly articulated in every way possible what is going on. And so that first thing that you'll notice in their distress sequence is this desire to over communicate and create very complicated statements. So that's the first step towards this micromanaging behavior that's going on. The second step, when they move into the second step of distress, is when they start doing things like over controlling. They will stop directing people effectively. They will really become focused around time, schedule, money, and around this need for whatever is happening in themselves or the people around them to be perfect. So that's what they're working on, is this concept of being perfect. And you will hear them say things like, "That's a stupid idea. You don't get it." They'll put on this mask attacking other people from the you position. You're not thinking clearly. You don't connect to the idea. You're not getting it, right? And this mask comes out, and actually their eyes, I'm going to try and do it. And so I apologize, it's not you taking offense. So I'm going to try and do it over here, but it's like, you're not getting it. And you can see this like line in their eyes and their face that show that they are now in this statement of distress, that they're now moving from being in a positive space to a statement of distress. And this statement of distress is happening because they are trying to resolve two things. The first thing they're trying to resolve is recognition that they're putting in a lot of effort to move forward. And the second thing is they're trying to resolve their connection with time and schedule. And so if people on their team, for example, are late, show up late to meetings, don't submit the project on time, that will lead them to start to move down this path. The second thing that will also lead them to move down this path is if people don't recognize them for the effort that they are putting in. Because every person wants to be recognized. And that third thing is they internally do not know how to recognize themselves, both for schedule and for effort. And so these people who move into micromanagement, they don't want to be appreciated for who they are as a person from an emotion standpoint. They don't want to be appreciated for their beliefs. They don't want solitude to practice. They want this sense of appreciation and are trying to figure out how to get this appreciation for their effort. And so we're going to talk more about that as we move into the next stage about how do you communicate with somebody who fits this micromanager profile. But the key thing and the key takeaway is to recognize that this is a pattern of stress that is going on in the person, and that they are using micromanaging as a way to control their stress. And it is not a good way to control their stress, but they are trying very hard to figure out how to show that they are working really hard and putting effort in as a way to be perfect, as a way to show up as perfect. So I'm just going to leave that there and to recognize this is related to this perfection pattern. Now let's move into activity number 2, which is the concept of how do you communicate with the micromanager who puts their mask on, right, and gets into this very direct, forceful, attacking mask. And in the games theory, we call this the persecutor's mask, right? This is this concept of attacking others. And so Dr. Tabby Kahler recognized this mask. So when we talk to people, one of the things that we teach in the process communication model is the importance of learning to adapt to the other person's communication style. And there are 6 different communication styles. So one communication style is related to thinker, and we communicate through thoughts, ideas, and logic. And that thinker pattern works most commonly with somebody who moves into the micromanagement. Other patterns, the other 5 patterns, and I'll quickly address them, and I would love for you to take a moment and think, which is the pattern that I speak the most? So the other patterns consist of what we call persister, and that is you speak through opinions and beliefs. And so we would say things like, in my opinion, I believe, we should. That would be the language pattern often of somebody who uses persister type communication style. The next style is harmonizer communication style. And this is a more nurturative, it's softer. The communication style is I feel, I appreciate, I love, I care. It's a very warm, soothing, calm style of communication. The next style is what we call the rebel communication style. And energetic, it is fun, it's like excited. There's like a lot of energy going on and joy, and the emotions are all just out there on the page. The next communication style is the imaginary communication style. And I think this will be my next topic. The imaginary communication style is very neutral. When you ask a question, there may not be a response. There's a lot of solitude. And when they do respond, somebody with this base communication style, it will be things like, I was reflecting, I was thinking, I was imagining, and there may be long pauses before they respond. And the last communication style is what we call the promoter communication style. It's very direct. It's very move into action. And it will be things like, get the report by 5. Do this activity. Move in this direction. And so each of us has our own communication style. And I would love for you to put a comment in the chat just as to what is the communication style that you feel is your most common and most natural to use, because it's easy and it feels right. So as you're thinking about what is that communication style to you, what's very important is to recognize that when we go to communicate with somebody, it's important that we do our best to adapt to the other person. But when we are in stress, our ability to adjust communication styles becomes extremely difficult. And this is true of somebody who is micromanaging. So their ability potentially to move to an emotional communication style, or move to a direct communication style, or move to a fun and playful communication style, all of a sudden disappears. We don't have that ability because we're in a state of stress, and we're in a state of discomfort and unease, and we are trying often to figure out how to get out of it. And so we put on our mask. The challenge is, and I appreciate this for anybody who is not in that micromanager distress pattern, is that when a micromanager puts on their mask, the other person's initial response is to put on their mask, which may mean they go into a state of blaming, or they go into a state of over adapting and feeling victim. All of these are very natural communication responses, which lead to the conflict going back and forth. That being said, the more you can become aware of your communication style and aware that the person who is micromanaging is not talking about you as a person, but is trying to resolve their own psychological need, then you can step back and think about, what is it and how do I communicate to this person? And so the key to communicating successfully is actually being able to elevate your communication status to something that is known as requestive communication, based around thoughts, logic, time, and schedule. And so you want to, provide positive recognition and say things like, you are doing a great job. I can see the effort that you are putting in. I understand how much it's important for you to hit time and schedule. So one of the things is to start by acknowledging from the positive, instead of recognizing and acknowledging all of the things that they're doing wrong. And I'm not suggesting this is easy by any stretch of the imagination, but if you can step back and go, okay, this person needs recognition of them putting in effort, of them doing a good thing. So the first thing is to recognize them for anything that they have done and recognize it around effort and productivity, time and schedule. So that's the first communication tip. The next communication tip, and this will actually move into the planning section, is around flipping into requestive. And so asking questions that aim at the thinking or logical part of their brain. So things like, what is the time this activity needs to be done by? How can I help you achieve the result that you want? Provide me 3 things that you need done in the next hour. So as you can see, right, I am asking questions in a logical perspective. We want to avoid as well asking feeling questions. How do you feel about it? Often what I have experienced is things like, Nancy, how are you feeling? I can see that you're feeling frustrated. All of that actually will do is cause somebody who is in micromanagement to spin even worse. And so what you want to do is really get in and ask questions around time, around schedule, around what they see the idea, the issue, or the problem is, and ways that they feel it could be solved and resolved. So when communicating to somebody who's a micromanager, spend all of your time asking questions and acknowledging effort around time, schedule, plan, and productivity. And you will start to have that person move out of their micromanaging behaviors. Third thing, let's jump into the last topic in relation to this, and it is around action plans. So you will have seen in your email a link to be able to download a stress management plan for highly logical people. And the reason I called it a stress management plan for highly logical people is if you go to share it with people, I didn't want to put stress management plan for micromanagers, right? Because that's just going to cause them to spin. But often the people who are highly logical, who have this concept around thoughts and perceptions of seeing the world through logic, time, and schedule, will resonate more with the term highly logical people. And so that is why I called it that perspective. But what we want to do is help that person who struggles with micromanagement to set up their day to fill their own cup, around time, schedule, and effort. And so in it, I provided both personal and professional guidelines. But one of them that has been my most amazing is really around what I call this priority 1 planning. And when I was most successful as a manager leading teams is when I got this concept, the priority 1 concept. So what I would do, and I encourage you to do this with somebody in your team or your organization, and the people who worked for me really found this useful, is we would choose our set of goals. We would choose our activities that we wanted to do. But each day, I would ask my team in a 5-minute meeting, what is the 1 priority that if you completed it today would move you significantly forward? And I would do the same thing for myself. And I would start my day, and I would start my team's day with them completing that 1 activity. And it didn't matter to me if that 1 activity took 5 minutes to do, or that 1 activity took them 4 hours to do. I would give them the freedom to focus on that 1 activity, get it complete. And then we would acknowledge the satisfaction of getting that done. Here's what happened. We were able to actually achieve more things faster because we focused on getting that 1 activity done. For the person who has a tendency to get into micromanaging, when they can see some big movement forward by themselves or a member of their team, that actually creates this positive energy, this positive success. And what corporations have shown is that when they focus on achieving that one activity, you can actually 500 times the productivity within your team and your organization. So you can actually, as a company, start to achieve more. And so as you work with a project with somebody who gets into micromanaging, it's sitting down and having them build something into their day that allows them to achieve an early win during the day. Because when they have that satisfaction, when they feel that early win, and they can see that others who are working on projects related to it get that early win, they gain that sense of satisfaction of, I feel worthwhile, I have completed that activity, and now they can then start to release that mask, they can release that shield that they put around them and start to adapt and be more flexible with people around them. And it's an amazing result because I had been practicing this for years, but I didn't realize why this was important to me. And I knew, as someone who micromanaged, if I could get my team just to focus on one thing, that I wasn't micromanaging all the little tasks and activities that they were done that day, I would just have my team show up and tell me, what's that one activity that you're going to complete today? What is that one thing that if you moved this forward would be incredible? And I could see the positivity because it also allowed flexibility for everybody else around me to really kind of prioritize what was important to them to do that day. And it gave them this sense of freedom to work on anything else during the rest of the day. And I'll tell you how effective this was. The last project that I ran, and I used this strategy, doing this 5-minute morning meeting with my staff, we were able to execute a project for one of the largest oil companies, 3 million under budget on a $20 million budget. And it was because I had developed this practice, but I didn't know why until I learned PCM. And now that I've learned PCM, I even know how to better go around and communicate to all of the staff the way they need without feeling guilty about how I communicate and how I need to fill my cup first. So if you are working with somebody who is a micromanager, it's really important to spend time with them, helping them sort out what it is that they need to accomplish, what it is that they need to achieve in their day. And I'm just going to take a sip of water. Now, how does this actually work, and how have I utilized this? So since I discovered the process communication model, I fell in love with helping people who really struggle with micromanagement, who really struggle with this communication. And I have clients who will pick up the phone and be like, Nancy, I am struggling today. I'm struggling to connect. How do I do it? What do I need to do? And so, for example, I had a client text me the other day, and she was going on vacation. She's like, Nancy, I think I've made a bad hire. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? And she's like, Nancy, I sit down with this employee and I am super kind to them. I gave them gifts for their birthday. I am really quite connected emotionally to them, and I get no response back. And she's like, I think I've made a bad hire. I'm worried about leaving this person. I'm worried about leaving my business. And within a few minutes, we were able to have a quick conversation. I was able to have her take me through that person's natural behavior. And we were able to discover that it's not that that person was a bad person. It's not that that person was difficult. It's that that person saw the world through a different lens. And once I was able to help my client experience this and see this, she was able to release that stress, that sensation that this person is a bad person, that this person is not going to be a good fit. And I taught her language patterns to be able to communicate effectively so that she can move forward. I also have another client who works in an engineering role, and I'm right at the moment teaching him how to adapt his communication style and how to put activities into his day so that he can move forward and be successful in leading his team because he has a desire to move up the corporate ladder. And so, one of the things that I love to offer to people, and as I said, I'm doing no sales pitch today, is that I love to offer people an opportunity to get on a phone call with me, to spend about 30 minutes with me, and share with me a communication problem that they may be having. So, it could be with somebody who is micromanaging, or it could be some other behavior that's leading to conflict and drama in your workplace. Because if I can provide you some really good help, then that has made my day. That has brought me a great deal of joy. And I feel that it is my job to be of service, to be able to help different people resolve communication, resolve drama and conflict in the workplace. So this chat is 100% free. It is 100% open to people to just book a call. It's called an impact and influence strategy session. And literally, I will help you decode what is going on with the way that the person that you're struggling with communicates, the way you communicate, or maybe it's a combination of different people on your team, and provide you suggestions like, what is it that I need to do differently? What is causing them to behave in this way? So just like the micromanager goes into micromanaging, we all have some sort of distress pattern in us, and understanding it and learning how to use it so that you can create a positive, empowered work culture is my goal in life. So if you would like to join me in an impact and influence strategy call, I will be sending a link. They'll actually, and feel free to join. And I invite you to have a conversation with me. Again, it is 100% free. There is no charge and there's no sales. To go with it, I just want to give great support to people doing great work in organizations.